Hi there. Welcome to Bourbon Turntable. We are the show that blends the love of music with the love of whiskey. With me tonight, as always, is my good friend, Drew Crawley. What's up, Drew?
Howdy, sir. Oh, just another lovely Sunday over here.
Yeah.
We had a weekend full of music, went to see some friends play. I played a little bit, and then today I've been hanging out at the house, just kind of hunkering down. So,
Well,
been a good weekend.
that's a good Sunday. And we've got a really fun show today. We have Chip Tate of Tate Company Distillery. We will get
Hey,
you introduced to Chip and get into some fun conversation with him. But before we do that, we have just a couple things to cover with you. First of all, we want to tell you about the Bar Cart Co-op. Bar Cart Co-op is a collection of friends who produce content for the whiskey public. Distillers Talk with Alan Bishop and Christy Atkinson. That show drops every Friday, and they have great conversations with people like Chip. They've had a couple of shows with Chip recently. They're fantastic. You need to go listen to them. Of course, after you listen to our show, of course.
of course.
Yeah. But this great show gets into deep conversations with the distillers across the country and around the world about all things distillation. Alan also has a show called One Piece at a Time Distilling Institute. If you have a question about distilling, you can email Alan and he'll send out video answers to that question. That's great for home distillers, young distillers, or distillers wannabes. My Whiskey Den. That show is with Pat and Mike every Monday night, 9 o'clock. My Whiskey Den is where craft whiskey is king, so be sure to check them out. And of course, Bourbon Turntable. You know where we are because you're watching us now. So while you're here, go ahead and hit the subscribe button and stick with us. And we have one more announcement for you.
All right. Don't forget to like, comment, share, subscribe, hit the bell notification to find out when new episodes come out, which is every Wednesdays on all of your streaming services everywhere. Apple, Spotify, whatever other ones there are, and the YouTube where you can watch the live recording itself.
Thanks, Mike. We appreciate your contribution to the show as always. So without further ado, welcome to Bourbon Turntable, Chip.
Thanks for having me, guys.
Yeah, man. This is going to be fun. Alan
Yeah.
Bishop introduced us by email, and I thought, wow, man, we've got to jump at the chance to try to have Chip on this because you're really one of the pioneers, considered to be one of the pioneers of craft whiskey, and so we want to talk with you a little bit about how you got into distillation in the first place.
Yeah. It's a little bit of a funny story because in summary, I kind of realized I'd been getting ready to do it for years, but not realized I was getting ready for it at the time. And what I mean is I got into cooking when I was young, then brewing, and that was really brewing. Beer was my passion for a long time. And I even had a plan at one point to start a little, I don't know, I guess you'd say brew bistro or something like that in here in Waco. But I just all of a sudden had this idea that what I really wanted to do, and I'd been a whiskey drinker more in terms of what I had in my glass at night for a while. I learned that honestly from my dad. You know, we enjoyed beer, but you know, that's not drinking. I'm just kidding. It can be, but it just it was always sort of natural for me to gravitate toward that. And we spent some time in Europe when I was young, so we'd always kind of tasted things from a young age, if you see what I mean. And anyway, all that coalesced around 2007 when I decided, you know, I want to start a Texas whiskey tradition. And I said to myself, well, I could be brilliant or just crazy as shit. Let's think about this for a second. And one of the funny things that helped was I'd studied to take what was then the Institute of Brewing exam. And this is in brewing, obviously, because they only did brewing. But for reasons having nothing to do with me, they combined with the Guild of Distillers the year I took the test. So I'd been studying to take this, it's like this international credential in brewing, because in my mind, that would be, if you're going to do this, you know, kind of make sure you know your stuff, see where your weak spots are.
Right.
And, but it's kind of like taking the bar without going to law school. Like it's not impossible, but you should get the books and you should read them like really well. And I'd been preparing for months, and I get this letter that they'd combine and like the Guild of Distillers and Institute of Brewing. And I'm like, okay, sure, whatever. And there'll be a new section on your test. I'm like, what? So after I was done freaking out about that, I saw the syllabus, and most of it was engineering. And as it would happen, I kind of had an engineering background from earlier in my life. So I was like, well, all right, I'll be all right. I wasn't thinking I'd be a distiller or anything, just like, I'll be all right. I can dig into this and pass, and I did. But then later, I guess it would been about 7 years later when I had the idea to do whiskey, it sort of reminded me that at least as far as the Scots are concerned, what you do is you basically make beer and you distill it. I'm like, I can do at least half of that. Let's try the other half, shall we? So I started messing around with that kind of thing. And it was just one of those, it's kind of like shooting for the first time. You realize, like, I'm pretty good at this, and I like it too. So that was really kind of off. I felt like I could aim at a target in my mind and hit it pretty well.
Okay.
And, that's not everything, because you're always evolving as a distiller and as an artist, but it's a lot. It's kind of like being a musician.
Right.
You're not sure that that's the right note, but if you plan to play that note and play another one instead, you still got some basics, and you wouldn't be able to do what you mean to do, at least.
Right.
So it was big to be, in terms of confidence and concept testing. And yeah, the rest is history, I guess.
So you started Balcones when?
2008.
Okay.
So yeah, I started it by myself in 2008. And there's some other people I took on eventually. Actually, it was mostly the guys that helped me roof the place, because we found this it was an old welding shop that went from being worth something to being worth nothing, because the state built a bridge over top. So it went from being a retail establishment to not a retail establishment. Now, that was years ago. But, it was basically the building I could afford. So we were going to take all 1,200 square feet of it and make it happen.
Yeah.
But it was, it was really building it was like building in a submarine, like every cubic inch, forget square inch.
Right.
It was planned up and down and every which way to try to fit things in there.
Now, did you build the first still that you used?
Well, sort of, but I didn't intend to. And I'll explain. Anybody who's ever done classic cars can understand. You know what I mean? So you find some beauty, right? And all it's got to get is a new transmission. It's a piece of cake. You have it done in 3 months. And you dig into it, and next thing you know, you kept the radio. It was everything. It was everything was rusted and busted. And you had to. So it was. I got the still, and I planned to make some modifications on it. And then this started leaking, and that started leaking. And next thing you know, you realize that a manway 12 inches wide is not a manway. I don't care what kind of man you are, not just me. Like, you just can't fold that small. And so, we had to put a new manway and a new this and a new that. By the time it was done, I'd replaced just about every part of it, except for the belly. And then you realize, like, okay, I don't know how hard making stills would be, but it's got to be easier than this. So, because you're trying to figure out what somebody did before.
Right.
You're working on used works. You don't even know what alloy they've used. There's just all kinds of questions that you have to, guess we'll see. And so the next set of stills I built entirely from scratch. And then about the time I was finished with those, that first set that we built, which in fairness were lighter gauge, they were only about 2 or 3 millimeter. And this is, I guess, a plug as a coppersmith, but it's also true. The thickness of stills is kind of like, it's just like tires. It does matter.
Yeah.
When they get too thin, it will be a problem. So consider that fact. So they were starting to do all kinds of things. So I basically built 2 of almost identical shape, but kind of proper construction, thicker metal, 1/2-inch bottoms, 1/4-inch sides, because we were doing direct fire.
Okay.
And
okay. Wow.
You definitely, that was all direct fire, and very manual direct fire. I mean, we weren't stoking firewood, but it was about as close as you get. But it was a lot of really good lessons that come with that, and there are reasons that I did that. other than we didn't have a boiler. But I actually like direct fire flavors for first distillations, especially. It's
Yeah.
just, it's the reason they use fire and copper to make caramel.
Mhm.
They haven't changed that because if you want something that isn't just really milky sugar, then you're going to need to hit a certain temperature. And that's
Right.
not going to happen with
Right.
steam. I mean, theoretically, but nobody's going to build you a boiler that operates at 700 psi. That's insane. Yeah. So effectively impossible, if you see what I mean.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So when you first started, how
Mhm.
much were you able to produce off of your first still?
Oh, let's see. So we had two 250 gallon stills.
Mhm.
And then once I added the additional two, they were each 500 gallons apiece. So we had 750.
Wow.
Oh, sorry, 1250.
Right.
Oh, I'm not doing the math right. 1500
Right.
between the four of them. But it was essentially down to a batch size. So the advantage of we had a 500 gallon batch size. So
Okay.
that was so, but it wasn't, it was probably, I don't know, 3, 4, 5,000 cases at
Okay.
most, like 12-liter cases, which is, a lot if you haven't distilled
Mhm.
before. And then once you enter the marketplace, you realize, like, oh, wow, that's not a lot.
Mhm.
And at
Yeah.
that point, were you distilling single malt? Is that what you're doing?
Yes, we did well, let's see, the very first thing we distilled, and by that I mean like by day of the week. So we were
Right.
effectively concurrently distilling the corn whiskeys, which first came
Okay.
out as the Baby Blue,
Yeah.
Mhm.
the malt whiskey, and the Rumble. Just meaning, not actually on any given day, but one on a Monday, one on a Wednesday, one on a Thursday, or something like that.
Right.
Mhm.
And yeah, so the malt didn't come out until later because it had a slightly longer aging
Right.
profile. But yeah, those were the three beginning concept whiskeys,
Yeah.
or
Yeah.
whiskeys and Rumble, whatever it is.
Yeah. And it really took off, right? So
It did. I always joke that it was kind of like starting a campfire in a forest. 1 minute you're freezing to death, and next thing you know, you're running for your life. It was really, we were doing well, especially considering, but we still had some cases to sell because it was just a situation of nobody's ever heard of you.
Right. Right.
And then we started to win some awards, and that helped. But the biggest one that honestly was pivotal in terms of the supply demand shift, meaning before we had a little more supply than we had demand, and afterward, not at all, was the malt. It was the Judgment of London, as they called it. I don't know if you read about that. Anyways, it was a competition we didn't even know we were in. It was kind of the Cognasi of the malt world, and they all decided
Okay.
which whiskeys they wanted to throw in the ring. And so that'd become a story. And then, there's nothing like telling people they can't have something to make them want it. So
Right.
it wasn't
Right.
hard to outstrip our supply. And then we were just kind of trying to manage and figure out good ways to grow, which is its
Yeah.
own, set of challenges. But
Yeah.
Sure.
yeah, it was, it really kind of flip-flopped at that point, because it wasn't long before I was making as many visits to get yelled at, for not supplying bottles as I was to supply bottles. It's coming,
Right.
But
Because
to
at
try to
that
not
point
lose.
you're still basically wearing all the hats, right? You're
Oh yeah, no, I
distiller,
was
you're the
definitely. I
distiller,
mean,
distillery manager,
Jared
distribution.
Jared had helped with kind of some scheduling stuff, which is
Mhm.
key. But the blending and the distilling, that was definitely my program, and then the traveling and the shows, and then of course being the business owner, you got to
Right.
figure out how everybody's going to get paid, whether there's money or not,
Right.
which
Mhm.
doesn't seem like an important distinction until you're the owner and you realize, like, oh, it's
Yes.
me. I'm like, yep, it's you. Nobody cares that you haven't been paid. Yeah. So yeah, I mean, it's kind of like trying to start a farm, by your bootstraps. And it sounds like a very national organic thing until you see the price of a combine. You're like, oh my God. Like, is that a decimal place?
Right. At
Yeah.
that point, how long were you aging your product?
The very earliest stuff was really just months old.
Yeah.
But
What
it
kind of
had
barrels
to
were you
do.
using?
These were small, new barrels, but with a caveat that it was wood that was kind of very well aged before it was turned into new barrels.
Okay.
Okay.
There are some spices and barrels, small barrels are like this, where a little bit goes a long way.
Yeah.
And, and the French will tell you the same thing about even big barrels with French oak, that there's nothing better for a young brandy than to spend some time in new French oak. Say, oh yeah, 3 or 4 years. Like, oh no, like you won't even be able to put it in your mouth. You're darker than your soul, just so tannic. It just puckers your whole self. But a little bit, 6 months, 8 months,
Yeah.
works wonders. And it's, there's a similar thing. It's the time frames aren't necessarily exactly the same, but I always felt like the right kind of small barrel, the wrong kind of small barrel just does what the wrong kind of big barrel would do faster, which is not a good thing.
Right.
Yeah. The only
And was
thing
there
worse than a bad slow driver is a fast bad driver.
truly
Yeah.
where was that wood coming from? Was there a consistent source or a consistent mill, or were you kind of getting it from wherever you could at the beginning?
A little bit of both. So we were sticking to certain suppliers of different kinds of wood. Ex-bourbon wood was great when we could get it. We'd even use some ex-brandy wood and even some ex-tequila wood.
Yeah.
And that was something that I kept track of, just because there were some some good and bad, but there were differences, and to kind of know what you're going to be looking at in a year. So, but then there are costs that come with that.
Sure.
You don't get something for nothing. You don't win the
Right.
Grand Prix with good gas mileage. And
Right.
the rate of evaporation is brutal. So, yeah, I mean, we get upwards of 20% evaporation a year.
Wow. Now, is that because of the casks you're using, or is that specifically to the region of Texas, or both and?
Yes.
Okay.
So, there are going to be three major factors, and I'm leaving out some peripheral things, but I'm just saying that if your barrels are cold, they're going to evaporate less than they're hot. The only thing that's going to evaporate more is if they get cold and hot, back and forth.
Right.
And the reason is bellowing. So what that essentially means is to remember that the liquid won't compress and the gas will. So when the barrels heat up, it'll push spirit and spirit vapor deep into the wood fiber. How deep depends on how much they heat up.
Sure.
But conversely, when the barrels cool down, it will then draw air and the spirit and other things that have been in the wood back into the spirit and back and forth. It's sort of pushing things in and out. And that does make the barrel wood do what barrel wood does faster, including extraction, but especially the oxidative components of aging. Now, the other factor, of course, is going to be the size of the barrel, which just comes down to a volume to surface area. And anybody who's taken 8th grade math can tell you that as you go up in volume, your surface area per gallon decreases.
Right.
And so another way of putting that is you're going to age more slowly.
Yeah.
So, yeah, small barrels in varying temperatures are definitely the high wire. You gotta make sure you nail it, because if you don't, it can be a catastrophe.
Yeah.
Sure.
So, but it has its advantages, especially for a young distillery. Like a lot of craft distillers, we want to put out something that is brilliant in the glass, but we also need to be able to do it and still pay our employees. And so, long aged whiskeys are a challenge at the beginning because of the economics.
Yeah.
So, finding things that are good at younger ages can be an advantage as well.
Yeah. Well, we're almost 20 minutes into the show and we haven't had anything to drink yet. So
that's horrible.
I know. I
apologize.
That's a host problem.
Oh, well, you're forgiven.
I mentioned pre-show when we were talking. I had heard you talking with Alan Bishop and Christy Atkinson on Distillers Talk, and they had brought up this mythical brandy that you had
The
distilled.
mythical brandy.
And so I thought, all right, well, you're not distilling yet at Tate Company, so we'll
Correct.
we will share some brandy together.
And I appreciate that. Like I said, it's we'll have to figure out if I can get you a little sample of it. But I learned a valuable lesson the first time I released a bourbon, and that it was, I don't care how you cut it. One barrel is not very much.
Right.
You know, it's like bringing a one Lunchable to a FEMA camp. And you're just gonna get your ass whipped. That's all that's gonna happen. You're like, I meant well. Like, yeah, that's just not enough.
Yeah.
And so I have to be very careful about how I parse it out because I have so little of it, because we had a lot of evaporation over those 4 years.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's an interesting. I'll tell you about the brandy if you want to hear sometime.
Sure.
Concept. Yeah. I mean, okay. Yeah. So traditional. We'll just say that a lot of the brandy intellectual space is occupied, rightly so, by cognac and to some degree Armagnac. But those are, you know,
Right.
big classic brandies that we all are familiar with. And especially in the cognac tradition, I think most houses would tell you that, you know, eau de vie is distilled, and there's certainly varying qualities, but brandy is made in the shea. So they may or may not produce their own, you know, white spirit, but they don't consider that to be as essential as what happens in the barrels and so forth.
Mm-hmm.
And all of that comes down to the fact they're trying to produce a pretty technically correct, interesting, you know, they're using mostly Onion Blanc, which is this very neutral grape. And so they're taking a, you know, well-structured, well-made white spirit and then adding the nuance that comes with barrel aging and blending and so forth and so on. And I love cognac. Don't get me wrong. We probably account for the highest dollars per household spent on cognac here in Waco. But that's just, you know, my whole view on a lot of artistic things is sometimes the received view can be taken as the only view. You know, that like this great thing is the only great thing that there could ever be. And that's where I'm sort of like, yeah, I don't know, maybe.
Yeah.
So the idea with the brandy that I made, in 2015, was to start with sort of a richer, riper, bolder profile, and to use different methods, distillation methods, and all of that to produce a well-structured brandy, kind of with a nice fat butt. So, and so this started with Zinfandel, some very, very ripe Zinfandel, and fermented in ways that were probably more similar to like a Côte de Rhône fermentation, lots of skin contact. This was just you know, crushed and taken right out of the skins. Not trying to make a grappa. No, there's anything wrong with that, but different thing. And then kind of applied some ad lib, I guess you'd say, distillation techniques, in part because I was working on different stills in a different place and different methods. So I ran by taste.
Right.
And yeah, I guess you'd say there were kind of 2.5 distillations in different parts in the different places. But I was really happy with it because I felt like I was able to capture a lot of the breadth and depth of the Zinfandel and put that in to then go along with what is a, you know, this is kind of gives you an idea. It's hard to get color, but you can see from the side, like it's not, you know, trying to get a good.
Yeah, that's very dark.
You get a little bit of a idea there. Now that's not proof down, so it's also at like 68%, which is it's actually quite nice like that. It's just not as open as it would be, you know, when you proof it down some.
Right.
But
yeah,
I mostly didn't think it needed any more wood when we took it out, so we put it straight in glass. And it's hard when your children aren't near home, you know. So anyway, one of my guys went down there with him and bottled it up. And so we'll get the rest of those bottles. I forget how many there are, but there's some few dozen bottles, which sounds like a lot, but as you know,
it's not just a lot.
It's not, man. It's like you're like the library of Alexandria. You know, like when you do that, like this is the only source there is in the world for that. So you kind of have to think of all of the reasonable requests that will be made in the future.
Yeah.
Like who might ask me to taste this 10 years from now and be like, oh man, I would, but I got drunk on Friday and it's all gone. You know, like fail. Yeah, you don't want to be like that. So,
Well, let's try this apple brandy from Old
Yeah.
Clifty.
French lick.
Spirits of French Lick, Alan Bishop,
Hoosier.
friend of the show, and
Yeah, I lived in Indiana once. Did you know?
did you?
What part?
Born in Indiana. Yeah. Such a full nose on this, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. What do you pick up on this, Chip? Before we weigh in, let's hear the expert.
I can smell a very low second cut on this. This is something that was you know, I would guess even down into the 50s. A lot of the rich sort of bassy notes of the apple.
Yeah.
And you can't smell it exactly, but if you taste it, you'll see what I mean. It kind of tastes like there's certain scotches that are like this as well. That emphasize that low end.
Yeah, that's one of the very interesting things for Kevin and I think both talking to someone with an actual distilling background is we could sit here and talk flavor notes all day, but understanding the technical, the why behind all of that is fascinating to us.
Yeah,
So.
I mean, I think so. I mean, I think you guys know this in general. I never really know what people don't do and don't know about distillation. So you just kind of have to stop me. But obviously, you know, a continuous still is something different. And well, it's continuous, but a pot still is batch. And my main point is that you're not just getting different alcoholic levels off the still as the run goes, but more importantly, different flavors, different aspects of the spirit.
Right.
And so a lot of those very solvent characteristics, high fruity characteristics are indicative. I mean, of course, all of this depends on what it's made from, the fermentation, all those other things. But I'm saying, insofar as we're distilling any given blank, like I want more of this or I want more of that. So if you want more glue notes even, but like take Pappy is a very, now that's not a pot still, but you want to talk about a very ethereal, lots of high-end notes in the nose, right? Whereas as you go on in the run, you get more sort of richness, which turns into kind of an oiliness. And where you see the most of this, honestly, is in smoky whiskeys. So if you look at Scotch, smoky Scotches, I actually mentioned this, I think, on Alan's show or something, but a classic example is Lagavulin versus Lafroig. They're different stills, mind, but they're made from very same malt, same peating levels, lots of same.
Right.
But one, meaning Lagavulin, is cut much higher than Lafroig. And the difference in the kind of smoke, the kind of band-aidy, iodine characteristics, that's really what you get at the low end for peat smoke malt.
Right.
Sure. Makes a lot of sense.
You see a very clear, you know, you can't smell those two whiskeys and be like, oh yeah, that's the same. You're like, wow, that's different. When it smells like I've been sitting around a campfire, a peat campfire or something, like sort of that smell you get on your clothes. It's sort of wispy. And the other is like I just came out of a, you know, tobacco barn on fire.
Right.
There's anything wrong with that. I love
Sure.
But not everyone does.
So so thoughts on the Old Clifty Hoosier apple brandy, guys?
I think it's great how he captured a lot of the apple characteristics that are sometimes lost on other distillation methods. So that's one of the things I noticed.
Yep.
How about you guys?
So I've not had a ton of apple brandies outside of what we've had from Alan. So my frame of reference for that world is a little bit different, but I do kind of get what you're saying where the apple comes through a lot. I get a lot of kind of you know, those old like bubble gum squares that you would get, not like Big League Chew or the bubble tape, the specifically the Hubba Bubba square chews, and then a lot of that leather and I think some oak influence. Kevin, do you know if this is ex bourbon or ex rye cask or what?
Used in it just says used oak on the bottle, but I'm pretty sure that it's ex bourbon casks.
Okay.
You think so?
I think there's some of that whiskey oak flavor.
Yeah.
Just a little bit.
It's the lactone profile. which of course is kind of from the oak, but it plays a certain way in the whiskey. I know what you mean.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, the
I really
esters, you can
enjoy
taste the age on it too. Smell the age.
Yeah. What do you think, Kevin?
I think it's very tasty. And I like that it's very authentic to the apple profile, like you guys have said. A lot of times some of the apple brandies I've had have tasted more like artificial apple juice, but this tastes like a real apple. You know, it's very authentic, which is no surprise when we're talking about Alan. So
yeah,
most definitely.
He likes the authentic stuff.
Yeah. So Chip, now you're doing Tate Company,
right?
And how long have you been at that?
Well, we've been building it since God was a boy. No, I'm just kidding. Since 2015.
Okay.
And we have built the stills for it, which is part of what took so long. Part of it was actually building a space or rebuilding a space to build the stills.
Right.
You know, all kinds of things are needed to actually do a copper works where you're working on big equipment. You know, you need a crane, you need air, you need all kinds of stuff. But in the engineering and everything else, and then frankly, COVID put a big hitch in our giddy up. We had a plan, it was going well. COVID happened, the plan changed. So we are, you know, kind of trying to figure out how to finish out because it's a much bigger property. We're only developing the first 5 acres of 27 and a half.
Okay.
But actually even planning for 27 and a half is a thing in itself. You know, they get to that point, they make you do all kinds of like runoff, you know, rainwater runoff planning. And one of the first things we had to do is bring in a water line from half a mile away. Because there's one thing I've learned in distilling, which is you never ask for water when you need it. You always ask for it before.
Yeah.
When they know you could just be like, fine, I'll go somewhere else. Because then it's there for the taking. Now, that's largely water that we would never need. But if you've ever built out a facility, you know you need to theoretically be able to sprinkler more than one building. God forbid it were to catch on fire.
Right.
And that requires a big water line. So they end up being part and parcel of the same thing.
Gotcha.
It's built for growth. We're not going to start big. But I realized a lot of the hazards and complications of essentially trying to get bigger engines mid-flight. It's a thing.
Yeah.
And the idea is to try to build a medium big facility and then just use it, you know, kind of lean into it. And that's viable because I did so much of the construction and engineering in-house.
Yeah.
Sure.
Some of it I didn't even mean to, but it just kind of worked out like that.
Now this is one of the stills that you built, right?
Yeah, that's one of the wash stills. That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah, so you can see in the background, that's the pot of a direct fire wash still.
Yeah.
That stainless thing is our pressure vacuum relief valves, which, you know, people are like, seriously? I'm like, yep, you could throw a grenade in there. But
wow.
If you know, one of the things as a former engineer you want to do is test your biases. And what I mean is there's things that look scary in a facility and things that are scary. And you know that by the numbers. You say, like, in the last 100 years, what do people die of? And it's not the things you necessarily think, you know, pressure fittings and all of that. But in terms of what happens to stills, not having the pressure vacuum, there's certain things that can happen that'll shift that suddenly. And if you can relieve it suddenly, all is well. And if you can't, stuff breaks catastrophically. And it could be anywhere from pretty bad to just awful.
Yeah.
Some of the actually some of the worst accidents we've had in American craft distilling connected to those very things.
Wow.
So, you know, there's a couple guys in Kentucky that, well, that's a different story. But yeah, I mean, it's definitely the second parachute. You want to make sure you got that and that it's working.
Yeah. So what is next for you guys once you get this first 5 acres developed, the stills in place? What's the game plan?
What we're really doing right now, we're kind of doing two things in parallel. one is an indeterminate timetable in terms of finding the right partners to work with. Is always something that requires time and patience, in my experience.
Sure.
So, you can do it fast, you can do it right, and this time we're opting to do it right. So I don't know what the timeline will be for developing out the rest of the distillery, but we're mostly focusing on being copperworks and working with other distillers to make stills, because
fantastic.
there's actually kind of a shortage of that, or for pot stills, especially over a certain size.
Right.
Yeah.
Here's a photo from your website.
Yeah.
This is
You got all the good stuff. Yeah.
That's impressive. I mean, you've got a really nice operation there. I mean,
thanks.
I've had the opportunity to tour a Vendome, and
they're great.
And this is, these are the same kind of things that you see there, maybe just a little different scale.
Right.
But
yeah, we use the same equipment.
Fantastic.
You're right.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, there's some things that are craft, and there's some things that are just industry knowledge. And roll benders and sheet benders and things like that, big torches. There's just a certain way you got to learn to work copper. And I certainly learned a lot from those guys and from Forsyth, and then experience is a big teacher.
Yeah.
But we try to, we are a craft copperworks, but I never mean that in the sense of technicality, in terms of like, if it's, we use penetration testing and pneumatic testing, and I would never let a still out of there that I wouldn't let my son or daughter use.
Right.
Right. You would felt good about that. That you check those brakes.
Yep.
Yeah.
So at this point, do you have the stills built for yourself, and you're just continuing to build for others?
Right. Right. Exactly. The part that remains for us is really I guess you'd say, the physical plant component. So it's remarkably expensive once you start getting contractors involved. Not that they haven't been to some degree, but I mean, I can't do the code electrical work. I can do steam plumbing past the OSY valve, but I can't do actual boiler work and electrical. And there's even a lot of stuff that we have, but just putting it together is still some millions of dollars that we're trying to get together. So it's kind of like running a modern farm, like I alluded to earlier, that it looks different than it used to. It's a little bit bigger than it used to be.
Right.
And that's all about making sure that you can offer, I don't know, like insurance.
Right.
It's very easy when you look at a lot of these craft businesses to see something that's beautiful, but you're not sure you could recommend it kind of for somebody who had kids or had a wife, or it's no pay and long hours, and is it ever going to change? And that's what it is when you have to do it. But I like to try to create businesses that are sustainable long term. That's really the emphasis of what we're trying to build is craft with longevity.
Right.
As
far as coming away from Balcones, what things did you take away from that experience that you're applying to what you're doing now?
Well, the difficulty of finance is definitely one of the things you allude to in the abstract. But I mean, it is, staying away from sort of the personal aspects of it. It is something where right now, I think you can see that a lot of the big companies see the worth in it in terms of the acquisitions and other things. They kind of see that it isn't just an idea, that there's a definite business model that can be pursued that'll be very profitable. I don't think they're just doing it for charity.
Right.
But I think there is kind of a gap in the private money market, or I say not money market, but private equity world, in terms of people who kind of get what it is, get what it takes, and get what it can give you in terms of long-term profits and sustainability, and understanding it's one of those things. It's almost like a fashion brand. That of course there needs to be substance, but the substance and style can't be entirely separated. But it's also important not to take the substance out of the style, because then you're just about to become a fad.
Right.
Right.
that all of this is part and parcel of being able to create a vision that is real and true and something that you can tell people about. That's how you build and sustain a luxury brand.
Right.
And I think they kind of like the idea of that, they see some of the costs and the investments, and you realize like building a luxury brand is more expensive and it's just more expensive than you thought, really. Like,
Right.
yeah, I told you this would get scary.
Sure.
And but it's I think characteristic of money to like to think that they are pioneers and to find in fact that they are more comfortable with things that other people have done before successfully. Like
Right.
once it gets scary, they're like, I think I'd like to go to Disney World instead. This whole like adventure thing sounded fun, but I think I'm done now. I think I'd like to go and take the tour on the bus and just, enough. So, but I'd say a lot of it I mentioned early also is scale. We had a very successful situation at Balcones in a certain way, except for we all felt like one-armed paper hangers. That it was if we did everything we could do and nothing went wrong ever, we would just be able to pay the bills. Just like mom and pa's farm. And if somebody got sick or the cow died, you were screwed.
Right.
Like it was over. There was no backup plan. There's no fallback. That was part of it. And the other part of it is just realizing kind of how the whiskey market works and realizing that like there's a certain number of cases that are necessary. I guess it's probably like the publication of a book. Like before a certain number of copies, pretty much nobody knows you exist.
Right.
And then after that, you will either succeed or fail. In other words, people will start to be like, hey, this is awesome. And it'll start to become really popular.
Right.
They'll be like, no, we're done with this.
Right.
And before that point, nobody's really decided because they never heard of you.
Right. But,
Sure.
because like with Balcones, I would imagine that when you first started putting your whiskeys out on the market in the Texas area, in the local area, people were very excited about that and kind of gobbled it up, and everybody was, hey, Chip, you're great, you're awesome.
No, it was the opposite. It was, I felt like a Nazarene. But what I mean is that they weren't rude or anything, but they were just kind of like, this is some strange bourbon, boy. Kind of like, I'm like, yeah, but I'm like, yeah, never mind. It's cool. But it was really, in truth, finding success in much more kind of cutthroat markets like New York, Chicago, California, London, that in many respects, I feel like it just has to do with the influence structure.
Interesting.
And I think, any given market, community, whatever you want to say, like if I were a craft axe maker, and I'm not, so I know nothing about what I'm saying, but I'm just saying, I bet you there's certain places that a person who did that could tell you, you should go to this conference, or you should do that, or you should associate, this is kind of, this is the community of people that does this. So if you want to do it, then these are the people that you want to get to know, and they need to get to know you. Otherwise, you're not going to do any business.
Yeah.
And I think that premium whiskey and craft whiskey being kind of a facet of that is part of a global or at least semi-global conversation. That most, not all, but many local opinions are shaped by national reviews and similar.
Certainly. Yeah.
But it kind of makes sense. You're a sommelier or whoever you are, and you want to know what new whiskeys are out there. You pick up the publications, right? You kind of go to those resources that you see as authoritative to see what's new and what's out there, what you might want to pursue and ask about. And then that translates, of course, into distribution. Because if nobody's asking about but distributors are practical, of course. As much as they may or may not like you, they want to buy bottles and sell them. And as long as they're buying bottles and selling them, then we're good. But otherwise, we're not good, even if we like you. You're like, nobody's heard of you, nobody's asking about you, and like,
right.
Yeah,
that makes sense.
So yeah, it really came down to understanding how the market worked, I guess.
Yeah.
Or as I experienced it then. Yeah. And I think it always morphs and shifts. COVID has definitely changed some things. But the fundamentals are still basically there. There's a collection of people that are affiliated in different ways, like y'all are part of this, that whiskey geeks everywhere, I'm sure, tune in to get your opinions, and because they're interested. And so that's how you often hear about new stuff that you hadn't heard about before.
Right.
Yeah.
You're right. And that's part of what we try to do is bring it into people both whiskey and music that they may not have heard of before.
Right.
And that's the best, really. It's like when a friend recommends something to you, you don't feel like you're being sold on it. You're like, hey, you should check this out.
Right.
Yep.
I mean,
that's largely how we hear about it too.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Right.
That's how
Sorry,
I hear
Kevin,
about
go
things.
ahead.
Right.
Sorry.
You could very easily do a show a month about Blanton's and about Taylor Swift or or whatever, and you would have people flocking to watch it. But how boring is that? So, but yeah, you want to do something different and try to bring to the market something that people are going to enjoy, but something that's not going to be something that they may find everywhere else.
Exactly. I mean, I think that's just a good marketing and artistic point that, many spirits drinkers are kind of like readers. They like certain authors. They're always willing to consider a new one. You just have to give them a reason.
Right. Right.
So, yeah.
Yeah. So when you do start distilling at Tate Company, what do you plan to distill there?
Whiskeys mostly. I mean, it'll be very similar to a lot of the things I was doing before, plus some things I didn't get a chance to do. I wanted to, but I didn't feel good about devoting still capacity to new stuff when I had distributors or retailers or whatever, kind of holding the torch for me, with empty shelves. I wanted to at least do what I could. So, malt whiskey, corn whiskey, bourbon, but brandy is something we'll enjoy doing as available, meaning there's particular kinds of, it'll be grape constrained. There's a lot of grapes grown in Texas, but I have certain things in mind, and that's normally something that builds over time because of the commitments, you make with growers and things. So, rye whiskeys are something that I'd already had planned. Rye malt whiskey was something I had planned when I left Balcones. That was going to be the very next thing.
Yeah.
And then, too late. So, we'll get back to that recipe.
Well, that'll be good.
So,
that'll be something to look forward to for sure.
Yeah, but a lot of rich kind of, I call neoclassic. That's how I like to think of my stuff. It's not necessarily traditional, but not weird.
Right.
So that's the focus. Pot distilled brown spirits. I'm not saying we won't ever do a white spirit. We don't have that plan just yet. It's not my focus.
Sure.
Yeah. That's good. We'll look forward to obviously that down the road, but there's a lot of great stuff you have going on right now. But we're going to kind of wrap up side A where we're talking about the distilling side of things and the distillery side of things. And we're going to talk music here in just a second. So this will be another fun conversation. But before we get there, we want to tell you about Inside American Single Malt. We're doing a show. Alan Bishop and I are hosting it March 7th. It'll be live at 8:00 on March 7th. And we've got some fantastic distillers that have a wonderful reputation in American single malt. We'll have Lenny Eckstein from Deerhammer Distillery, Mark Vierteller at Whiskey Delbach, Murphy Quint at Cedar Ridge. And guess what? Chip Tate's going to be with us too. So
thanks, guys.
Be sure to mark your calendars for that. March 7th. It will be a lot of fun, as these things always are.
Yeah.
So
looking forward to it.
Yeah, that'll be great. And I appreciate you being on, agreeing to be on that.
Appreciate you including me again.
Yeah.
This is a lot of fun.
Yeah. So let's try this second brandy, which is the Iron Root Sleight of Hand. I was fortunate enough to get my hand on a bottle of Sleight of Hand. It is an 8-year brandy
for sharing that.
from Iron Root Republic.
Yeah.
That'll wake you up.
125.4 proof. Cast strength.
Yep. Oh, it's very different. Do you happen to know what grape varietal this is? Did they disclose that, or okay?
I don't think so.
It is very much subdued, which I really like. I've had a lot of great brandies, a lot of Armagnacs, cognacs, that kind of a thing. What I really like about this is the oak influence, and then those kind of really kind of back end notes, almost like anise or allspice, and then some of that. And I mean this as a compliment, but almost like that menthol, kind of where it spreads out and kind of coats your palate, and then you breathe it back through.
Yeah.
So I know sometimes
There's
menthol
a high
can be
solvency
associated
note
with
in there. Yeah.
It
And that's
can
not
be
a bad
associated
thing,
with bad cuts, but maybe my vernacular is limited in how I'm kind of expressing that. But
I
it's
know what
kind
you
of
mean, though. It
reminds me
has
of
that
that.
menthol feeling in your nasal cavity.
Yeah, it's really good.
I mean, I think this is a good example of something. Obviously, it's not comparable in many respects, different age, different substrate, but this is much more heady and ethereal. So, I mean, to say this is an example of like a higher cut, there's lower cut isn't entirely true, but there's something to that. You get some of the more fruity and light notes.
The oils on both of these, if you just look at your glass, it's on both the Oak Cliff apple brandy and this, it's just very, very thick, long legs.
Yeah.
And I taste the oak influence, but I don't feel it's tannic.
No, this is gonna be used.
Yeah.
I'm guessing 55, 62.5 gallon profile, 225 liter profile.
Yeah.
Because otherwise in Texas at 8 years. Yeah.
Right.
And that's exactly what I would do too.
And I know that they've
used overt, it's not an overbearing oak profile.
Yeah. I know they've used some of the larger capacity barrels in what they do and how they age.
Yeah.
But those guys are fantastic. They do great work, and I think this is just another example of that.
I'm enjoying it.
So they Robert and Jonathan, they interned under you or learned under you for a while. Is that right?
So I consulted for them.
Okay.
So they were kind of like proteges, and that they came down and we're looking for some help to start their distillery up in North Texas, and it's
Denison, yeah.
Denison. Geography. I'm not so good with geography, but Denison, exactly right. And so we talked about their general plan and the different things that they were going to do. So we got, actually, it was right to the point we got down to the physical facility, and that's when things started getting tense at Balcones. So I kind of had to bow out and say, I don't know if I can give you as much attention as you deserve right now. So they finished out the rest of the distillery pretty much on their own, and with help from some other people.
Sure.
But we had been talking and known each other a while, and met up over the years. And then, as I mentioned, when I distilled that brandy, they were kind enough to let me use the very same stills that this was made on.
Yeah.
I mean, it's the stills they got, so I assume they were the very same stills.
Right.
But that was very generous and much appreciated, and allowed me to prove out that concept. So, well, it's not very much. It's still exciting to participate in that and to prove out a concept and see where it goes over time. That's always the hazard with distilling. It takes years to really know where a shot lands. So
and how close it was to your target.
Yeah. And it's many decisions that go in along the way, but you're both learning. Hopefully, you'll say, "Oh, I learned everything." You're like, "Yeah, I hope not." hope to be so much, make stupider decisions next year than I did last year. Or just, more prudent planning. There's a lot of logistics that go into making whiskey post barreling.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
That, it's saying you're done when you put it in the barrel is sort of like saying you're done as a parent when you put them in school. Like, there's still a lot more to do.
Right.
There'll be a lot of discussion, and is this working out, or do we do this instead, or feel like this is a bad. There's just a lot of, with the best places, interaction with the spirit as the maturation is happening to help guide it and direct it the way you want it to go.
For sure. For sure.
But yeah, I think they do a great brandy here. I don't know either which grape it is, but I would assume they're Texas grapes.
They are Texas grapes. I know that. I don't know which grapes, but yeah.
Me.
They're Texas grapes. So,
yeah.
So music. Chip, what was your first album that you ever got? You may have bought with your own money.
Bought with my own money. That's kind of. I'm pretty sure it was a U2 album. See, because there's like a very fuzzy line because my dad had a very big album collection.
Yeah.
So I would record a lot of those on tapes, and then later you kind of have to make the decision as to whether or not to then go to CD.
Right.
Or, it's a format question. But probably Led Zeppelin 2 in terms of actual,
that's nice.
Favorite of mine. Yeah.
It's a good one.
But, my earliest music exposures were various. And I know you were asking about concerts too. Those were probably more classical. I guess it depends on because I actually played violin for years.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And we got to I was in an orchestra all through high school.
And where was this? Where were you in high school?
Lynchburg, Virginia.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great.
So, foothills of the Blue Ridge.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, in terms of your first concerts, so you're going to see local symphonies, national symphonies, or how did that work?
A little bit of both. We would go sometimes to DC area to see symphonies. But there were. I remember I remember early Dave Brubeck concert too.
Oh, wow.
That was pretty amazing. There was definitely not my first concert, but what was cool, it was in Richmond, in a big open park. And again, I'm bad with geography, so somebody else can call and tell us what the name of it. Anyway, big open park is right next to the railroad track. So he's there with the band and they're jamming out, and this freight train comes just rolling through, blaring. At first, and then they retuned to the freight train and just jammed out to it. And
wow.
It was really,
that's awesome.
Like, that's why he's famous. There you go.
Yes.
Yeah. So it was really great because it was very real live music experience, where a bunch of musicians just have to deal with noise that's there and turn it into an instrument. Like, wow, well done.
Yeah.
So, yeah, that was pretty cool. How about you guys? What were some of your earliest? I guess you talk about this all the time. So,
yeah, we do. I was gonna say my early concerts were a lot of contemporary Christian music type things that my parents drug me to. But I think the first concert that I ever spent money on myself was the Foo Fighters at the Oklahoma City Amphitheater. I grew up in Oklahoma, so went to go see them, and I forget who they were opening for at the time, but it was the Echo Silence Patience Grace album. So
and they were opening for somebody.
Yeah. Right.
Go figure. Right.
Well, I have a similar deal that I remember. So I went to a Toad the Wet Sprocket concert, which I'll be honest, I was not really into. This was my mother saying about my sister who was coming to visit me in college, and your sister's really into this band, and maybe you could go take her. I'm like, fine, I'll go. So we go, and Dave Matthews Band, they kind of nobody outside of Charlottesville, had heard of opened for them.
Okay.
And they just blew it out. And everybody was just like, whoa, like what just happened? So that was kind of a cool, unexpected live music experience because the opening band effect.
Right.
People you don't necessarily know.
Yeah. My first concert was Stevie Ray Vaughan.
Oh man.
So that's
pretty impressive.
Yeah, I mean, I knew a little bit about him when I saw him at that time, but was just blown away. I was probably a sophomore in high school or something.
See, it's because what's funny is I play blues guitar, but I've never actually been to a blues guitar performance. I mean, like a concert, like a Stevie Ray or Tappan. Yeah, weird. I know.
You should be able to find those pretty easy down in Texas.
I was gonna say. I know Gary Clark Jr. is through your neck of the woods like every other week.
Oh, no, don't get me wrong. I've been to all kinds of different things. They're just typically not straight up blues.
Yeah.
So, Green, Texas, obviously, I'm too far from here, and there's a band or two that plays there. So, we have more of a mixed tradition here in Texas, I would say.
Sure. So what do you play when you're at work? So if you're, setting up for the day, getting ready, whether that's on the copperwork side or something else, what's an artist or two that you're throwing on?
Okay, so see, I don't know how honest my tastes are so eclectic.
That's all right.
It varies from Tab Benoit to Dr. Dre to Tupac to various Israeli bands to let's see, just a lot of different stuff. It really depends on what I'm doing. I think it's a lot of it's a mood thing, or kind of a vibe thing. But I like Eastern European choral music. I like classical music. I like good rock. I don't know, a bunch of different things.
On the classical side, are there favorite composers?
I guess Beethoven and Mozart.
Yeah.
But I'll tend to listen to classical music mostly when I'm cooking. I don't know why.
Okay.
But just
get that.
It's a habit then.
No, and Beethoven and Mozart is like saying
Jimi Hendrix. I mean, like that's like a personality test. If somebody doesn't like Jimi Hendrix, like, what do you do with that person? I mean, really, something wrong with that person.
You keep your distance.
Find them in a padded room somewhere.
They're either lying or not trustworthy. Something wrong with them.
Well, that's awesome.
How about some of your favorites, Drew? What? I know you said you went to a Foo Fighter concert, but like, what's your jam?
Yeah, I love a lot of that side of the world. I was an emo kid at one point in life, so I listened to a lot of the pop punk and emo stuff. But anymore, I'm really into what we kind of refer to lovingly as dirt emo. So sad emo songs on acoustic guitars, but the John Prines and Jason Isbells of the world, Tyler Childers, Rustin Kelly. That's kind of the world I live in. But one of the beautiful things about Spotify and one of the beautiful things about this show that we do is I get introduced to new stuff every week. So I kind of have my home base, but I like to think that I venture out a little bit more.
I do the same
especially
thing.
because of this show. Yeah.
I used to be a lot more energetic about seeking out new music. So now I'm really thankful for a lot of those services, like you say, that kind of help introduce you to things that you might like. And you don't like all of it, but artists, I'm really glad I, got to hear it. I'm like, I never heard of them before.
Right.
So I definitely feel you there.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. I grew up on the Stones and the Beatles and Led Zeppelin and the Who.
Oh,
and
yeah.
then got into U2 and Rush, and I'm a walking classic rock station, I guess.
So here's so which one of you or do both of you play?
We both play.
I
You
thought
play
so.
too. You
I
play
know.
bass guitar.
Okay.
Don't sell
There's
yourself
a
short.
certain way guys talk about music where they're like, "Yeah, I don't really do that." Like, whatever, man.
Yeah. Full disclosure, I turned 56 years old. Actually, tomorrow as we're recording the show, and I decided at the first of the year that I wanted to learn how to play bass.
Yeah.
And so for Christmas, I got a bass guitar. So
Yeah.
now I am plucking
That's
away,
cool.
trying to learn how to play bass. So yes, that
That's
is
pretty
how I
awesome.
play.
Well, it's funny. I played acoustic and some classical for years, but like barely classical, sort of,
Yeah.
you know. And it wasn't until I guess probably 4 or 5 years ago I started playing electric. But I kind of always intended to someday. I just didn't expect it to be like my mid-40s. So like, that's cool.
Yeah.
But,
How do you relate distillation to music? How do those two parallel for you?
Well, I think there actually are a lot of parallels. You know, if you play lead like I do, I feel like that's kind of like distilling. So you're working within a structure, and you should know that structure to some degree, because if you aren't, you're just lost. There's a difference between improvising and being lost. And then the other thing is you're reacting to it. And there's something about performing music that recognizes that you're never going to play something exactly the same way twice, because it's never exactly the same moment twice.
Right.
And maybe that's accidental, and maybe that's just what it is to play. But like you're playing that right then, and with those players at that time, with that vibe, with that crowd, like that's what it is right then, and all that makes a difference. And so, you know, you're kind of distilling the same thing each time, but you're not. You're having to do slightly different things each time. And you know, if you're doing it right, if you're not, if you're just kind of pretending like it was the last performance and everybody kind of sounds like they're phoning it in,
right?
Like, hey, where'd the conductor go? You know, like, come on, you guys playing together, or you just playing in the same space? And that's how stills act differently, different ways, distillations and yeast are living creatures and all of those things. So, and then of course, you know, whether you're blending it live, so to speak, with a sound or after the fact with tracks, that you know, blending is a very big component of it. You know, how do you layer things together to add and not take away?
Right.
To add richness and character without masking, you know, or at least where you can feel like the sum of the parts is greater than the individuals that went into it. Because some of it gets masked, but like, how do they play together well? And they're very similar questions, I think, there in terms of kind of open space and intensity, all of it.
Yeah. And bringing something that is unique, but marketable ultimately, right?
Marketable. And I think, you know, marketable for me as an artist, craftsman, is it's kind of like being a chef. Like, you understand there's some artistic license in this, with the caveat that when you order your steak medium rare, someone's going to show up on your plate that you're going to want to eat.
Right.
That's our agreement.
Right.
There's lines inside of that. If you go outside of those lines, that's not what I asked for.
Right.
Well, like, that's brilliant, but it ain't bourbon.
Right.
Or whatever. And I think there is a kind of, not that you have to necessarily meet a profile that's already out there, but especially when you aren't doing that, when you're creating a profile, you need to give it some shape. You know, it's like writing any character. It needs to not sort of be anything to anybody all the time, because that's not anything at all. What is that? It's wandering. You know, like, there should be something that's central about that somebody can describe to a third party and say, you know, this is what I like about that spirit. It's going to vary a little bit, but not in a way that they like. You have to be a blender to taste the difference between the different batches. And nobody who likes the last batch is not going to like the next one. You know, and that's doable. Just like for a chef, if you know how somebody likes their food, you can totally cook them something that they're going to think is great.
Right. Every time.
But that is a collaborative thing where you're artistic tendencies and desires also meet kind of where what makes sense in terms of palate and where people want to eat.
Right. Because once people trust you as a chef or a distiller or a musician, then
it gives you great license.
They'll trust that, okay, what you've put on my plate or what you've put in my bottle or what you've put in my ears,
right?
I will definitely give that a try. But once you violate that trust too many times, then
or really at all. I mean, I think it's just sometimes you're just going to miss the mark. Hopefully not. But I don't think there's ever an excuse for bringing something to the table that you don't think is worthy of it.
Right.
That's just a fail. And it's really, really hard. But that's the deal. They're trusting you.
Right.
To spend money first and taste booze later.
Right. Especially
you got to make that a worthwhile proposition.
Especially in premium whiskey.
I think just really with anything. I think people are kind of tired of being lied to. Bullshit. And when they find something that pretty much is what it says it is and keeps doing that, it is not only nice and pleasing, it's almost reassuring. It's like this guy shows up. He shows up.
Right.
And that's because you can't depend on a lot of things to show up. There's a lot of kind of morphing, like different brand changes and this and that. And nobody, is it a focus group or I don't know.
Yeah.
But it doesn't feel like it kind of holds to something true. It may change over time, but hopefully it changes and matures rather than wanders. And that's a judgment call.
Right.
But we all make these judgments with music and with booze.
Right.
Is this an evolution or is this just kind of they forgot what they're about?
Yeah.
We see both.
No, that's a very good point.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, but I love it when people continue to evolve in what they distill. I mean, I think that really is at the heart of what craft is about. I think is not just taking the current epistles as the only books that could ever be. Just realizing this is ongoing. There could be more stuff, but everything has to earn its way in. If you want to be a new classic, it has to be something that that it resonates with people.
Right. Right.
And there has to be something real, but also something, as you put it, marketable in that.
Yeah. And hopefully the substance is greater than the marketability or the marketing efforts.
Well, I think that is like a litmus test. If you're working harder to sell something than you are to make it, there's a problem.
Right.
And it might be with you and it might be with them, but there's definitely a problem.
Sure.
But I think that happens a lot in alcohol. That has to do with the way the industry is structured. Post prohibition, there was a lot of consolidation. And that created a lot of supply that was looking for demand. That is to say, you can look at some of the traditional models for people creating brands. You could go to one of the bigger distilleries and say, hey, I'd like to hit a certain profile, and they will sell you whiskeys and blending services and so forth to produce such a brand because they have whiskeys looking for a home or did.
Right.
There's a lot more demand now, but it's a different model than a bespoke suit where not a single piece of cloth gets cut until you have a full concept of exactly what it is that you mean to make when you're done. You planned it all out.
Yeah.
And you get a very different kind of product that way. I mean, not really surprisingly.
Sure.
Because one size fits all sunglasses aren't actually.
Right.
Yeah.
Makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. What were you saying, Drew?
No, I just said that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
I was agreeing with the analogy.
Yeah. Okay.
So, but I think that's where the kind of new any way to keep what we've had, I think, involves developing something. To do what people did before, you can't just do what they did again, because that's not what they did. They created something new.
Right.
And I think each generation of craftsmen has a tradition to learn and appreciate and respect, but also then add to and say, what did I do? And hopefully it means educating some other distillers as well.
Right.
But further developing the tradition and flavor profiles, tastes, all those things are you see that in the culinary world. It's constant evolution.
Right. Well, even looking at music, you see a band will come out and they'll start a trend and say say grunge, for example. Right. And hey, wow, this is really popular. So all the studios, all the record companies, all the existing bands are going to try to copy that in some way and take advantage of that wave. Same thing happens in whiskey. And a lot of times it's the craft whiskeys that are leading the innovation, and then the big guys try to copy it.
But I feel like it's almost like, this sounds bad, but it's almost kind of like talking to high school kids. And so I get it. Like, it seems like a good idea to try to act like the cool kids. Then you turned out not to be cool, and everybody thinks you're an asshole.
Right.
So instead, what I would recommend is just be you, and don't be, skittish about it. And people will respect you for it. And I know that sounds like the hardest way, but it's actually the only way. Anytime you're following them, they'll treat you like you're following them.
Yeah.
So don't. I mean, like, there's no reason not to do it other than it sounds scary, but it is also kind of fundamental in terms of how you approach it. I don't think you can create art by pandering.
Right. I agree.
Yeah. Yep.
But I think that applies to whiskey too. And unfortunately, there are commercial ramifications as well. Or maybe not unfortunately, but what I mean is, when you pander, you have to spend a lot of money to sell it. Because there's not much there.
Right. Right.
You got to put a whole lot of lipstick on that pig,
Right.
And it actually sometimes is easier just to create a story that's interesting.
Right.
And I mean, actually, and then tell people about it. Yeah. And it sounds really scary, but it's the only, I think, kind of sustainable way. You need to have something to communicate that people want to hear, and they're like, cool, I get that. I get what you're about. I get why you do this and why it's important to you, and why I might be interested in trying what you make.
Right.
Yep.
I think that's really important, especially these days.
Agreed.
Yeah.
All right. Well, Chip, we're going to start wrapping things up here a little bit. And as we're doing that, where can people find you and Tate & Company on social media or the internet or wherever you may be?
Yes. TateDistillery.com and TateCraftCopperworks.com. And then is it at Tate Distillery for Instagram?
Okay.
Get that right. My wife, Rachel, handles our Instagram. So
thanks, Rachel, for the assist.
Yes. Always assisting. Yes.
Yeah. And Drew, how about yourself?
Yep. You can find me on Instagram at drew.crawley63. There'll be lots of announcements about live dates and some new releases coming up within probably 2 weeks from the time this show airs. So we've got more music on the way and a lot more dates coming up for the summer. And then obviously I would be honored if you would check out the Tower Songs EP, the singles that we have out from this next record on Spotify, Apple, wherever you listen to music, and then keep your eyes peeled because there's another record coming very, very soon.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. As for the show, you can watch us on YouTube. If you'd rather listen to it, we're on your favorite podcast platform, as long as that's Apple, Spotify, or Google. We have a Facebook page where we post all of our shows. We have a Facebook group where we encourage folks to get on there. Tell us what you're listening to and what you're drinking while you're listening to it. It may be something that we haven't tried before and inspire us to try it ourselves, or it may be something that we haven't had in a while and would inspire us to check it out again. So please hit us up in that Facebook group, and we would love to hear from you there. Now, for next week, Drew, who do we got?
We've got our friend Chris Tapp, frontman and lead guitarist of the Cold Stairs, making, I believe, his second appearance with us.
That's right.
He's going to be coming on to talk about their new record, Voices, and all kinds of cool stuff with us next week. So be sure to tune in for that.
Yeah. So there's some new music for you, Chip. You can check that out.
Love it. Check
All
yours
right.
out.
Well,
all right. Thanks, guys.
And just thank you again, Chip, for being here with us.
It's my pleasure. Appreciate
a lot of
you.
fun. Look forward to checking with you again. We'll have you on our bar cart show on Single Malt, and that'll be a lot of fun. But we'll love to have you on here again sometime soon as well. And on behalf of
my
Chip
pleasure
and Drew and myself, thank you all for watching. Cheers, love, and
Cheers.
Free Bird.
All right.
Good night, everybody.
Good night.